The masculine silhouette through the medieval period changes relatively little, at least for half of the man's body that we're talking about. Now, first I'm going to start this video with a few caveats. First of all, I'm not going earlier than around 1100. AD 1100 is a pretty decent starting point, I think, in terms of talking about general men's medieval clothing, and I'm not going to go any later than 1500. After 1500, I consider Europe to be in more of an early modern period than a medieval period, and the clothing starts changing so strangely and so differently per country that it would just take me an awful long time, and quite frankly, I'm doing a PhD and don't have the time to do all of that research. Sorry. At some point I might do some more specific videos on decades or country styles in different periods of time, but for now, we're just going to be talking about a general Northwest European manly silhouette. Caveat number 2. When I say the masculine or the manly silhouette, I am talking about people who were presenting as masculine in the period and what that meant for them in terms of what they found aesthetically pleasing. Obviously, I'm not here trying to make any kind of inclusivity or exclusivity claims about the medieval period. If you present as feminine and want to dress in masculine clothing, go for it. I bet you look amazing. That goes for modern or historical clothes. As a reenactor, I'm happy to go in public saying, I don't give a damn if you are a woman dressing as a man or vice versa in a reenactment context, as long as you're doing it well. So, with some of that out of the way, let's get started. So in Northwestern Europe, most of the fashion in the medieval period tends to focus around what's going on in France, or the Holy Roman Empire, with some outlying fashion developing in Italy, Spain, and Britain. Contrary to the popular beliefs of many English reenactors, England wasn't the main focal point of fashion through most of the medieval period. That was France, and that's the same for the early modern period as well. They've always been pretty darn fashionable down there, ooh la la, etc. Around AD 1000, what you're likely to see as the fashionable male silhouette, or manly silhouette, in Northwestern Europe, is going to be the general tight-fitting or fitted hose to the legs, like we see here in the Tiberius Psalter, and then above those you're going to see a tunic fairly closely fitted to the torso with tight arms that you can sort of ruck up down the forearm, and a nice flaring skirt. So if you've ever seen my Viking clothes, you'll know that that's my general medieval look. Later on in the 11th century, we look at things like this. This is an English late 11th century embroidery known as the Bayeux tapestry, for some reason. And I know why it's called that, but it's just funny to me that it's not from Bayeux and it's not a tapestry. Here we see several people from king down to probably nobility wearing, again, the tight-fitting legwear, the flared-out tunic, down to around the knee, with a fairly well-fitted torso. Some of the other depictions of men in the Bayeux tapestry or the Bayeux embroidery also show them with split tunics, with the front split open down the front, probably to make it easier to do things like riding horses, running at speed, and that kind of stuff. So towards the end of the 11th century, the silhouette is still fairly closely fitted at the torso, fitted sleeves with a flared skirt at the waist, going down to about the knee area, sometimes slightly longer, sometimes slightly shorter, depending on what you're doing, what status you're at, but always with nice, tight, close-fitting leg coverings. So, gents, we want to see your nice, well-turned calves for this. Moving on into the 12th century, as you can see from this image here, we've got the standard tunic that we've been seeing for the last 60, 70 years, with the split front in the nice voluminous skirt. We've got the tight-fitting sleeves and the fairly fitted, close-fitted torso. But above that, we've also got something quite new, something very fashionable, something very Norman, which is the blio. We have these massive sleeves, so they're tight-fitting at the top, they're nice and closely fitted, and then they flare out. And this guy's sleeves seem to flare out quite a long way, and as you hold your arm up, you can see it tumbles down. So they're definitely loose-fitting sleeves. Under them, though, he's wearing the nice standard early medieval tunic that's got the tighter fitting sleeves. So the blio with the split front there is very long. It's right the way down to ankle length, but underneath it he's still wearing a nice blue pair of tightly fitted hose. So by the 12th century, things are starting to develop a little bit, especially in higher status clothing. So if you're an earl or a lord or a knight of some kind, maybe you've got a nice blio that you wear for formal occasions. It's unlikely you'd actually wear it to fight things, but this dude's fighting a dragon, so we'll give him a pass on that. This next manuscript that we're looking at is a medical manuscript, again from the early mid-12th century, and you can see here these guys are wearing the standard tunics. These are just flared at the waist, they're close fitting on the arms, they have their tight hose, and they're also wearing ankle boots. And also note that the doctor is wearing a cloak, knee-length cloak, pinned at one shoulder, and this is actually the kind of stuff that you see right the way from the Roman period. The end of the Roman period in Britain especially, you start seeing this kind of tunic and hose and cloak look. So this really is an incredibly versatile look. Opus Elenae has actually done a wonderful, wonderful video on making a medieval capsule wardrobe, so a very versatile small wardrobe that you can use for a very versatile wide range of periods. And if you are a man looking to reenact between kind of the Romans leaving Britain and the 13th or even 14th century, I cannot encourage you enough to just get close-fitted hose. They can even be trousers, they don't have to be split at the top, no one's going to see there, hopefully, and a nice linen under tunic and a nice woolen over tunic. All of these tunics would probably be made from either wool or silk if you're very, very wealthy, and I'm talking royal level of wealth for the silk tunics. As far as we know, there are very, very few full silk garments for anybody who wasn't a king. Roger II, King of Sicily, had a full silk coronation gown, and it is very nice. So later on in the 12th century, tunics can go even longer. This pouch from between 1170 and 1190 shows a man and a woman dressed very similarly. The only thing missing really is the tippets from the sleeves for the man there. He's wearing a very long tunic, it's ankle length, it's split down the front. He might be wearing a head covering, a coif. Very simple, basically a linen head condom. We'll see some more of those. And I plan to make a video on how to make a coif at some point. They are the goofiest medieval hats. So by the end of the 12th century, the man's silhouette has kind of fashion-wise gone from being flared out knee-length skirt and tight legs to very long, very slender, very elegant looking. You're kind of swooshing your way across the floor in your palace as you're wearing your nice long silk or wool tunic. It's a long garment period. So we're going from that kind of that sort of sticky out, the ladies' toilet silhouette, I call it. You know, you have that, and then you have that, and then you have that. We're going towards more of a kind of straight up and down look. By the time the 13th century rolls around, men are wearing a huge variety of clothing in Europe, northwestern Europe especially. Italy and Spain kind of have their own fashion traditions by now, and they wear some different things, and at some point I'll try and make some specific videos about those if I have the time and I remember. But in terms of your Norman France, in terms of your British Isles, Ireland, Scotland and Wales by now are starting to use mostly, if not entirely, Norman fashion. And what we're seeing now is an even more long, flowy, drapey look. So these guys here are wearing fairly long tunics, again, ankle length. One of them is wearing a fur-lined cloak over that. The other is wearing a strange sort of cassocky surcoat with sleeves that you appear to be able to shrug in and out of. They're quite cool. I'm tempted to make one of those now. They look pretty cool, eh? You could wear that for modern wear as well. That would be a nice summer coat. Anyway, the fashion obviously in this specific context is for the tight-fitting sleeves on the tunic, but then quite a full cut, quite a baggy-looking tunic, and quite a long tunic as well. We've also got black shoes here. They could make black leather. The shoes generally tend to be quite generic for most of the medieval period. For most classes of society, they're just foot covers, usually turned shoes, turned inside out, quite simple 1 or 2 piece shoes are usually quite acceptable. But black shoes, black leather was fairly complicated to make because it involved a lot of oak gall, dye, and various chemical processes. So here we are in the 13th century. So a little later on in the century we have this. This is the, I think it's pronounced Maszyjowski Bible, also known as the Morgan Bible, Morgan, and we're looking at some farmers collecting grain, some wheat farmers. They're wearing the coifs sewn in 2 pieces down the centre of the head there, and they're wearing very voluminous tunics, split at the front. This chap's is split at the front and lined in probably an undyed natural linen, and it has turn back cuffs, so you can turn the cuffs back. This is one of the earliest images I've actually seen of split cuffs, which become much more common towards the end of the 13th and into the 14th century. Again, Opus Elenae's wonderful, wonderful video for CocoVid shows lots of button-down sleeves and forearms on sleeves from the 14th century, and they are fantastic-looking garments, they really are. But still, we've got ankle boots, and we've got nice tight hose, and you can actually see the detail in this image of the hose being tied at the fronts to the brays, to the linen underpants, to the waistband of those, using probably a leather thong or a woven band. So you can see they're still wearing separate hose at this point. And then finally, towards the end of the century, towards the end of the 13th century, again this is from the Morgan Bible, but we can see a huge selection of things here. We can also see that people have started not bothering to use hands or feet. They're not bothering with those anymore. But the majority of the people here, they're all men, and we have a selection of things. We have royal and noblemen wearing these drapey, sort of Romanesque toga-like cloaks. We also have lower class individuals wearing the tight hosed, the front split tunics, quite generously cut in the body, but fitted to the sleeves, and a coif. So if you took the coif off, those men on the right-hand side doing the hanging would potentially fit in from 1050 right the way through 1250. So that's 200 years for you to reenact just using that set of kit. You could even push this further, as we'll see in a couple of seconds' time. So let's move from the mid-late 13th century to the late 13th, 14th century. So this is 1300-ish, it's the start at least of the 14th century. I believe this is a French manuscript, and as you can see they have now invented hugging and kisses, which is nice, and the tunic is still very long, it's shin length, and you can quite nicely see this guy's hose aren't full-length hose. Then fitted sleeves, they're quite generously cut. They've actually shaded in a lot of folds in the cloth in a slightly darker orange, so we can tell that they're not necessarily the tightest fitting tunics, but once again, a nice generic looking tunic. The difference here is we've got lots of belt mounts on what could be velvet belts, or they could be leather belts dyed black, but the belt is now becoming a real fashion item in terms of it being wide enough to have mounts on, visible, long. So before this, the long belts that are very popular with reenactors aren't so much of a thing, especially earlier on, 1100, AD 1000 and earlier. Those long belts with what we call bollock knots at the top, those knight knots, they're not really a thing. You don't really see those. They're a bit of a reenactorism, to be honest. We still have nice sort of mid-length, me-long hair, and tight-fitting hose, once again. Still there. But above the tight-fitting hose in the 14th century, this is where things get interesting. So we're no longer seeing the ladies' toilet silhouette. We're not seeing the straight up and down 12th century silhouette. We're starting to see form-fitting stuff that really actively manipulates the body shape. So these two fine fellows here are wearing coat hardies, also called coats. Some people will just call them a buttoned tunic. They have buttons down the front to make them easier to get on and off, and this is the first time we really see long rows of buttons in Western men's fashion becoming a thing. They've also got buttons down the forearms, and those are going to stay in fashion for a long old while. They've got the long tippets on what look like over sleeves. They've got the long tippets at the elbows, extra pieces of cloth, and they're wearing big, voluminous hoods, and these hoods could be plain like these are, or as you can see in this image, they could be quite spectacularly dagged, they could be shaped, they could be cut, they could be cut with stamps, they were decorated, they were embroidered. And these two guys are also wearing fun net shoes. They're not made of net, they're not made of string, they're made of leather that's then stamped repeatedly and then drawn out to get that kind of crisscross net pattern in the leather. They're beautiful things, they take a lot of work to make, so these two guys are probably quite well to do. Another aspect of this is the waist, and where the waist is. So in some cases you have a belt, almost always at the waist or on the hips in the 14th century. They're quite popular. Hip height belts could be quite popular. But these two guys are wearing their coat hardies without belts, and you can see that they emphasise the tummy, and having that kind of snaky, curved back with a bit of a bulged out tummy is quite a fashion statement in the 14th century. So these two guys are dressed quite fashionably. They've got their dagged hoods, they've got their tight hose, they've got their long, fully buttoned coat hardies, they've got tippets on the shoulder, one of them has at least, these long tippets, and they are quite form-fitting, these coat hardies. I've tried to make a coat hardie and it went very badly. I will make another one at some point with some assistance, I hope. And also, party colouring is starting to become a thing in the 14th century. So stripes, like you saw in the last image, party colouring, like you see in this image, is a real statement. So you want to be nice, snaky. It's all about the bust and the butt. Oh yeah, show me your bum. So working our way into the late 14th century, the chest becomes the place to be for men's clothing. So in this image, you see an actual, I think it's 1360s, 70s, pourpoint, or pourpoint, for Charles de Blois. And Charles de Blois is wearing a very fashionable piece of clothing. This garment is actually intended as armour. It develops from the gambeson, from the padded garment that you wear, usually underneath chainmail. But by the late 14th century, the padding is used to manipulate the shape even further, so you can see how much the chest puffs out on St. George here. And he's then got that skirt down to about mid-thigh length. His legs are still very slender, but he's now got that real kind of Superman, that really, you know, that, what was the name, that really bad artist from the 90s who did all the X-Men comics and he made Captain America like that thick. That's what you're going for. You're going for like chest out, stomach in, is what you're going for. And the padding and the shaping and the tubular nature of that pourpoint really helps that to happen. But in the next two images, you'll also see that here you've got a nice flowing tunic, and these are obviously fairly poor people, they're lower class people compared to Charles de Blois. They're not wearing that big puffy out, manipulated, padded chest thing. They're wearing just a long flowing gown. That allows you to wear lots of fabric, it keeps you nice and warm. It was very cold in the 14th century in Europe. It also means that you have quite a lot of fabric, so you can show wealth, but you don't have necessarily the level of tailoring. Having said that, this picture shows quite nicely that tailor-made garments for wealthy enough people could also be long and flowing. And maybe you're an academic. By this time, if you're an academic or you are a cleric or you're a teacher, a professor of some kind, it becomes quite fashionable to be wearing this sort of long, flowing, elegant gown that covers a lot of the body shape. So it's very modest, but also you still see in this picture they've got the nice tight calves in their hose. So you can have a bit of a return to that sort of ladies' toilet flared out look, usually caused by gathering that coat up the waist there. By the time we get into the 15th century then, you start seeing people wearing things like this. Now this man is actually sewing the fur lining into a giornea, which is basically a fur-lined surcoat. It's a sleeveless surcoat. Behind him is what rather wonderfully becomes, I believe, a hoople, and it's been basted at the waist to give you these really tight, structured channels of fabric. And that's super fashionable. So clearly what we're trying to do is emphasize that hourglass shape. Wide shoulders, down into a tiny waist, flaring out. And that flaring out emphasizes your nice, elegant, long legs. Pair that with some pointy shoes, oh, mwah, spot on. And yet, this tailor's wearing a shapeless tunic, a very plain looking hood, tight hose and black ankle boots. These could effectively be from the 1290s. As it turns out, this is around 1410. Now this guy is absolutely emphasizing what he's got. He is flaunting his buttocks. He's got his points to tie his hose up onto his doublet so he doesn't have to obscure it with any kind of fastening. There's no skirt on the tunic, the doublet I should call it. The doublet is waist length, it's got no skirt. He's got big poofed out grand assiette sleeves with the big shoulder poofs there to give him a nice powerful shoulder. And the man behind him is wearing an absolutely effing ridiculous hat. Quite frankly, I detest most 15th century fashion. High fashion in the 15th century, to me, I think these guys all just look like absolute perverts. Awful. But we're going to keep talking about them. This is John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, visiting, I believe, the King of Portugal, and you can see the hoople on there with those tight channels of cloth on the man in yellow in the background. We've got this nice yellow doublet with a dagged skirt, tight looking hose, pointed shoes, really pointed shoes. Those insane points on those shoes there do become popular. By now, we're also in big hat territory. So we've got long hats in this image. We've got the long hat in the man in the men at the back. The lady there is wearing a very long hat. The men, the king and the ambassador are both wearing these kind of felt bowler hats, which I think are rather charming. This is also the time where we have chaperons being worn. So that is effectively your dagged hood, your nice dagged hood. You roll it up, you stick it on your head, and you have the long tail liripipe coming down here because somebody decided to wear his hood on his head. The medieval period. Once again, in this feasting scene, we've got the King of Portugal, we've got somebody English, and we've got somebody from somewhere else. We've got some bishops in there. You know, I don't really know medieval flags. If anyone knows where that golden lion is from, stick it in the comments. And we've got these incredible shoulders. We've got slits in the sleeves to let your tighter fitted sleeves in your under doublet come through. We've got tight hose. We've also got a long drapey robe on the man in black in the foreground. Yes, everybody I believe in this image is a man. We've got the chaperon. He's also wearing that chaperon that I just mentioned. That's the guy in black there. There's another beautiful green, ridiculous, floopy, shouldery houppelande with a big felt pointy hat, pointy shoes, but still tight ass calves. And yet, remember, this is also a time where places like Germany, Britain, and parts of France are really cold in the wintertime. So fur-lined robes, nice full fur-lined wool robes, patterns to keep your shoes out of the mud in the streets, and furry and fur-lined hats. These are all popular as well. So the silhouette can be both incredibly exaggerated, almost insect-like, with those big shoulders, the thin arms, the thin legs with the pointy shoes, and then that big bulging chest, and the strangely channeled houppelandes, and a really distended hat. So if you were to just draw somebody's outline from the 1450s, 1470s, say, 1440s even, they'd look insane. They wouldn't look like a human being. So we're really distorting, exaggerating the outline, the silhouette of the men here, much, much more than we are earlier on in the 11th, 12th and 13th centuries. Now, my only real I guess my favourite garment from the end of the 15th century, from here we've got, I think we're in the 1490s to 1500 in Italy, is the red coat you see in the background there. I love these. I love these coats. I don't know if they have an official name. I've seen them called various types of name. They're just a nice square necked coat with a side closure, probably closed with hooks and eyes down the side, with a nice skirt, full sleeves, and he's wearing one of those Tudor caps. It's basically a cap with a brim turned up. Could be made of felt. You could also knit them and then felt them up. I think Sally Pointer's made some like that. The stripy hose I'm not a big fan of. But you've still got a nicely fitted torso. Okay, we've got the nice wide flared sleeves, and we've still got those tight, well-fitted hose. So having closely fitted, well-shaped legs right the way through this last 500 years, you can get away with just having a pair of wool, tightly made hose. And if you get the right material, it's an incredibly versatile piece of kit to have. In this period, by the time we get to 1500, you start seeing stuff like this as well. And what we're looking at here is the party colouring of those coats that we just saw as part of a parade. Now, this is a Tudor parade, you can tell from the red roses on the green and white background, which is, of course, the colours of the martial colours of Wales. Lots of Tudor hats. We've also got these sleeves that are loose and then nicely fitted, and those big square Tudor shoes. And I hate those. I find those absolutely repulsive. I just think they're the stupidest, most ungainly looking shoes. But underneath those men are all wearing cod pieces. So you've got a separate central piece for your hose. So the hose now go up a little higher, and you tie a central piece of fabric to cover the genitals. They can be used as a pouch as well. Many of them were stuffed. Many of them were decorated. Obviously, the one I make for my Tudor kit is going to be ridiculous looking, to scare the clergy, of course. So the final dude we've got here is a German man of around 1500, and this is kind of the end of our little video trip through time. He's wearing his nice flat cap, probably a knitted flat cap, felted up. He's got a nice fitted guaranteed that's been padded. It's got layers of cloth inside it. On the front of that coat, he's got a nice little, very simple, very subtle collar there. He's got very wide, flared, slashed upper sleeves on his coat. He's got a nice full skirt. He's got his tight hose, and he's wearing a pair of ankle shoes. And this is basically the culmination of everything we've seen. So we've got sleeves of different types of fittings. We've got the skirt on the tunic, and we've got the tight hose. All of those features have their roots back in the early medieval period. So the tunic, the Roman tunic, becomes the medieval tunic, with a bit more of a skirt and a bit more fabric. So it's a bit more warm and a bit more versatile in northern climes. The hose effectively stay exactly the same for 500 years. Okay, they get a codpiece, but they're still just two leg tubes made of wool. And you want to get them nice and tight to the calf, so cut them diagonally on the fabric. Cut them on the bias, and they will hug to your calves nicely. The skirt, the flared skirt, that's a feature throughout. This one is closed with hooks and eyes, but some coats are closed at the sides, some have been closed with buttons, like the coat hardies, some of them didn't have any buttons on, like the earlier tunics. Hats are becoming very popular now, whereas in the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, we don't seem to see so many of the hats. We see coifs, and we do see straw hats, but in terms of fashion hats, as far as I know, they're not particularly big. So there you go, that's the manly silhouette from AD 1000 to AD 1500. Keep your calves out, don't skip leg day, and make sure your genitals are covered, and you're basically there. But there's plenty of versatility in this, as we've seen. You can wear one of those early medieval, plain round neck tunics with a fairly closely fitting sleeve. Doesn't have to be tight on the wrist. A lot of people think they have to be tight on the wrist, and I'm not convinced that that's the case. So nicely fitted sleeve, a simple neckline, make it about knee length, make it flared out nicely from below the waist, and you can wear that thing from AD 700 right the way through to AD probably 1400 if you are low status and if you live in Northwest Europe. So there you go. I hope that was interesting for you guys. I hope that was helpful. This is my last CocoVid video for the CocoVid 2020 extravaganza. So for everybody who's come along and watched and enjoyed all of the events on CocoVid, thank you so much for being a part of it all. I hope you guys have had fun collecting the badges. If you would like to get a badge for this video, stick around till the end because there's going to be one just up on the screen. Feel free to explore all the rest of my videos. For all of my wonderful new subscribers, thank you so much. This has been absolutely mind-blowing as an experience. I'm going to go and have a hot bath and a cup of tea because it's been a long old weekend. So thank you ever so much. I'm Jimmy. Thank you so much for watching my videos, and hwyl am y tro.